everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today. We're excited to get into the weeds and talk about cybersecurity. And to do that, we have some experts on cybersecurity joining the call. And as well, a voice from the donor's perspective. We know as nonprofit leaders, this is top of mind and something that is important to address and think through as an organization. And so before we get into the topics today, I'd like to introduce our panel, starting with Jason. Jason, please introduce yourself and what you do here at Funraise.
Hey everybody, I'm Jason Swenski. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at Funraise. I lead our R&D teams and I've been working in software for the last 17 years. I have experience in everything ranging from health IT to open source projects, large-scale systems for Fortune 500 companies, and currently one of the co-founders here at Funraise. We build technology that empowers nonprofits to do more good. And at Funraise, my focus is staying ahead of the curve with respect to not just reacting to challenges, but anticipating them. And that includes everything from developing innovative tools that enhance fundraising to making sure our platform is resilient and scalable and secure, especially as fraud and security threats become more sophisticated.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today. I look forward to digging in a bit more with you. Theresa from Sikich, thank you so much for joining today. Would love to, if you could give us a background on yourself and Sikich.
Thank you. So my name is Theresa LaMott, and I am a QSA, which is a Qualified Security Assessor. I lead PCI DSS assessments, which stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. And I work with different companies, different organizations of all kinds and sizes, and help them secure their environments and make sure that they are following these prescribed security controls of that data security standard. And I've been with Sikich for about 10 years leading these assessments. Sikich does a number of different things, and I just specialize in this PCI payment card industry world and cybersecurity.
Well, great. Thank you so much for joining. It's great to have you here. And lastly, but not the least, is David. David, thank you for coming back on, joining another Funraise webinar. Please give us a little bit background on yourself and what you do as well.
Hey, thanks, Justin. Like Justin said, my name is David Schwab. I'm VP of Digital Solutions at DickersonBakker. DickersonBakker is a social impact organization resourcing agency. It's a very, it's a long-winded way to say we help organizations raise funds, find talent, and have really good strategy to at the organization level to operate their organization successfully. And like Justin mentioned, I will be bringing the lens of both the day-to-day operators, right, in an organization, but then also the perspective of donors, having sat in the trenches with many organizations who've gone through both security issues, but then also solving those problems and navigating those.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Maybe actually just to start with you, David, as we kind of jump in before we get too technical on some of the aspects around cybersecurity, as just to kind of frame it for our listeners. How much does cybersecurity come up when you're dealing with organizations, especially as it relates to fundraising? How much of this is talked about in your work directly on the front lines with nonprofit organizations?
Probably not as much as you would think. There are broad conversations about security, being reliable, being trustworthy, but that largely hasn't really moved into the cyber space yet. As we know in our industry, we move a little bit slower than the commercial space. So we now are starting to have conversations like this more often. But I think a conversation like this, and it's something that I regularly bring up with the organizations I work with, is how important cybersecurity is, digital security, understanding things, even as simple as keeping the plugins updated in your WordPress account to as complex of how do I process $1 million transactions online successfully, right? There's so much to cover in here that it's a daunting topic. But I think conversations like this are really critical to start that momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, I'm going to come to you with a question, and I'm going to set it up with some context. So, when I think what we hear a lot of people kind of, I think, misunderstand the difference between like fraud and hacking, right? And I think this is most prevalent within the nonprofit ecosystem as it relates to card testing. And a lot of organizations will feel like they're being hacked when all of a sudden they start to see a lot of these these tests happening on their giving forms, which we know that this is a result of card testing and so forth. So maybe just to kind of help frame this sort of conversation and this topic, can you help us understand the difference between fraud and hacking?
So they're related. I think in the simplest terms, fraud is tricking people to get money, and hacking is breaking into computers and to steal things and mess things up. If I was to like shrink it down into explain like I'm five kind of definition, both are not great. Both are bad for nonprofits, right? Because they hurt organization trust in either case, and they cost money, and they kind of make a mess in either situation. I guess if you want the more technical definition, so fraud is typically using deception or misrepresentation for like financial or personal gain. And so the card testing is like the primary example of fraud in nonprofits. Some fraudster will buy a bunch of credit cards and try to test each one's using some means. Giving forms are an easy target for that because there's no exchange of goods or services. You can do really small transactions to sort of test a list of stolen credit cards to see if any of them work. And the purpose of that is then to take those credit cards and use them somewhere else to make larger purchases. That makes a mess for nonprofits because now they have all these like failed transactions. Hopefully they're failed, right? If they're not failed, then they have to go refund them, or they get disputed, and that causes chargebacks. And that hurts the reputation's growth. It hurts payments. It hurts reputations, all that good stuff. Hacking, on the other hand, it's probably worse, right? Because that hacking would be someone has compromised your systems. Someone has broken into an account or manipulated some data or stolen some data. And that's leads to, you have to disclose that. You have to figure out what the target is, what the vector was. You have to do analysis, and that can be much worse than card testing. So they're kind of related. I think people do tend to panic when they see card testing, and they're like, "Oh, we've been compromised," and they think the worst thing because it's like a misunderstanding, and so there's fear as to maybe someone has broken in and stolen some data. That's typically not the case. It's typically more of an annoyance, and the way to mitigate that is making sure you're using platforms and payment systems that have lots of mitigation strategies, of which there are numerous different types to sort of prevent that kind of thing.
And we're gonna talk about some mitigation strategies in a bit. And so we're gonna come back to that and talk what can nonprofits do and what should fundraising platforms do as well to aid in helping this issue. But Theresa, I'd like to turn to you next and just get a broader understanding of what is cybersecurity. I think you're probably the best equipped on this call to answer that question. And so if you could take some time to really kind of frame what is cybersecurity.
Absolutely. Thank you. So cybersecurity, it's really just a fancy word for protecting your digital information, your digital assets. So, not too long ago, a nonprofit would have all their records in a filing cabinet. They would lock that, or inside a locked office. Donor information, financial statements, volunteer rosters, everything was just on paper. And security was maybe a lot simpler then. You just locked those doors and shred those papers when you were done. But today that data, you can't really see where it lives anymore. It's all online. It's in the cloud. It's in emails. It's on people's laptops or mobile devices. It's great because everything is faster and more flexible, but now that data, you can't really see how it's being accessed, where it lives. It can be spread across so many different places. You just don't know exactly what's happening to it. So cybersecurity really is that modern version, the digital version of locking those file cabinets and office doors and having security alarms. So those threats are coming from phishing emails and hacked passwords, people or unpatched software, just people trying to get into those systems and get at that data or test those credit cards on a platform to see if they're valid numbers. And it's not just somebody trying to sneak into the office anymore or come in and test a card. If you saw the same person coming in 10 times into an office space trying to make a payment on a credit card, you're going to see something was up and know that this one person using 5 different cards, this isn't legitimate. So it's trying to detect all of those things that in that digital world now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you said something I think is really important to kind of double click on, and the word you said was phishing. And I think that it takes me back actually to my days before Funraise, when I was at Liberty in North Korea, actually with Jason. And Liberty North Korea dealt with a lot of very sensitive data that was literally life or death. So part of the mission of Liberty North Korea was to rescue North Korean refugees. And these refugees, we would, consume their information, personal information about these individuals in a secure way and store it in a secure way. But the reason why it was a matter of life or death is if North Koreans were identified once they left the country, it's considered a capital crime. And the North Korean government would use up to 3 generations of punishment, would punish the individual's family up to 3 generations. And so keeping this information was safe and secure was incredibly important. And to ensure that we were following the best practices, we actually hired at the time a cybersecurity firm to basically at least first test what are our vulnerabilities as an organization. And it was really fascinating. And the entire organization didn't know we had hired this agency. There was maybe the exception of 1 or 2 people knew about this. And for about a month, they went through this exercise to really see where our vulnerabilities were. And at the end of the day, and Jason, feel free to add to this because you're very much a part of this. The thing that was most fascinating to me at the end of the day, our biggest vulnerability were our employees. And it was through phishing attempts, asking questions in very, very slick ways that looked like it was coming from the leaders at the organization, but it wasn't. And to the point where passwords were being given up to sensitive, systems. So at the end of it, we had this readout, and we wanted the readout to be eye-opening to our whole team. And so the approach we took was actually let's not sugarcoat any of this, this is not about shaming, but let's just have an eye-opening moment of who gave in to these phishing attempts so we can get better. And we walked through this readout, and we initially failed as a company in many different ways. And I just remembered, and this was about 12 years ago, I think it was something like that. I just remember just being so shocked at how it wasn't like a security breach from a digital perspective. It was an employees who just gave up sensitive information, not believing that they were actually doing that. Jason, I don't know if you had anything to add to that experience, but it was pretty wide eye-opening for me.
I can't believe that was 12 years ago. Yeah. So I think, to Liberty in North Korea's credit, one of the best things about that exercise was the response. And the response was one of, how can we learn from this to do better? The response was also one of transparency. And I think those 2 things factored largely into the success of that, and then the continual improvement, and then making that sort of a permanent state of affairs versus a one-off. It's pretty natural for organizations to do the security for the sake of the box check. The best thing about what we did there was it turned into a culture of security versus just, hey, we do the technology and check the boxes. I mean, the technology is important, and having good tools and all that stuff is like a really important thing. But having it in people's mind as this is part of my job, this is, something that, we all can improve on, something that we have to be thinking about as, a first class thing, was just an absolute like great thing that came out of that. And it's very easy to say, well, we've done the motions, we've done the sort of the check boxes, and therefore we're fine. And that leads into when something eventually does happen, and things will eventually happen, whether or not it's a minor thing or a major thing, it influences how you respond. It influences how the organization responds. And that can be brush it under the rug, everything's fine, which leads to things like large breaches by major credit organizations, which we won't talk about right now. It leads to those big data breaches that affect many people, the sort of Chernobyl effect of let's sweep it under the rug or like minimize it or whatever, versus just attacking it head on and saying, nope, this was bad. We're not going to like publicly shame you, but we need to fix these things and address them by fixing processes and fixing recommendations and fixing technology and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And the good thing is it was a great learning lesson. And to this day, Living North Korea has never been hacked. I feel like that's important to say since we shared the experiment there. Theresa, for nonprofits who are thinking about where to start with cybersecurity, maybe you could help us understand, like through the lens of like your assessments, like what are the things you're usually looking for when you're going to when you're working on these assessments within your clients? Like what are some signals or opportunities for organizations to really get ahead of the curve on cybersecurity attacks?
Yeah, so something that Jason was saying too, it really is it's more than just checking a box like, oh, we have antivirus or anti-malware solution or something like that, and everything is fine. It's way more than that. And it really becomes the culture and the day-to-day practice that it's built in, that security is built in to everything, every process and every system, and every person, so that training and that knowledge is there across the board. You'll often hear cybersecurity and having these partnerships. It's a shared responsibility between every piece that makes up the environment. So it's from every service provider, every system, every tool that you have. It's all involved and it's all shared. One can affect the other. So doing some due diligence of making sure that your partners are in a good place, that they're doing things the right way, is really important.
Absolutely. I think that this idea of security culture is really important. And David, I'd be curious to hear your perspective on this. I think as we know, nonprofits really work hard to build a very strong company culture. And when you layer in security culture, this could rub some people the wrong way, especially when there's a need to know basis, right? Because you're pouring like your heart and soul into like the mission of an organization, and then you're told, well, you actually don't have access to this type of information, depending on the type of the work that the organization is doing. And so from your perspective, working with organizations, how do we marry the two so that it doesn't erode company culture, but it's still top of mind for every employee at an organization?
Yeah, I think this conversation really fits in with a broader conversation that I really think is important that's happening in the sector. And it's asking hard questions about an organization's culture and how do we as an organization become more donor centric. Now, that's not saying the donor is the hero of the work that we do. It's not saying that the donor is the only reason we're in business, but it is saying without the donors as partners, we probably aren't going to be able to deliver our service, or not at the scale at which we need to be able to enact the change we started this organization for, right? So how do we create a donor-centric culture, well, that starts with building trust, transparency, and honesty with the people investing in your mission, right? And how do you do that if you don't have a bedrock of confidence to say, hey, the really important information you gave us is safe, right? I think that it just becomes a fundamental building block of creating a donor-centric culture. Being able to confidently look a donor in the eye, or pick up a phone and tell a donor, or even in your intercom chat with a donor, and be able to say, yeah, your information is totally safe. If you ever have a question, here's how we handle it. If you ever have an issue, here's the process we go through. And these are things that just become ingrained in an organization. Everyone from Sam at the front desk to Sarah behind the president's desk, right, becomes completely fluent in the practice of and language of security and protecting their donors, because that's a critical part to inviting people in to partner with your organization and your mission, is to show them that they are partners and that their investment is safe.
I really, really like that perspective. Go ahead, Jason.
I have a definition that I like to use for professionals. And so there's lots of different definitions that you can kind of come up with this. Like you can say a professional is someone who like does something for money as their job, right? That's one definition. My definition of professional is one that I borrowed, and that it is someone who will do the right things even though no one is looking, right? So it's kind of like saying a professional is someone with integrity, right? And for me, in the sort of nonprofit space, that means from a security perspective, are you doing exactly what David said for the donor? Because you have access to all this information. They're partnering with you. You're dealing with their sensitive information, whether or not that be credit card information, whether or not that be their PII. So if you're doing an export of donor information, are you cleaning up after that export? After you exported it and you have like a CSV file on your computer somewhere and you're putting it into some other system, are you doing that? If you're taking credit cards over the phone, are you writing it down on a sticky note? Can you look the donor in the eye and say, hey, yeah, you did this donation over the phone and your information is secure? Is that sticky note still on your desk, right? Is it the case that all of your software is PCI compliant? Do you know that, right? Are you using stuff in WordPress to collect donations? Is that compliant? Have you published your SAQA if you're, at that level of an organization? Do the donors see that and can be confident that you're using software that is going to protect their information? I think operating in sort of that high trust environment and then making it transparent for donors that their information protected, I think that is certainly the conversation that needs to be had. And how do we instill that culture? And how do nonprofits instill that culture in their organizations?
Yeah, very great perspective. Just what I was going to add on to that was just how a strong security culture really just creates even stronger trust with the donor, which at the end of the day is the lifeblood of the organization. And so thinking about it from that perspective is really interesting. Jason, I did want to come back to you and ask, you think, and someone that spent several years working in a nonprofit with highly sensitive data, if you were to start an organization from the ground up today, what are like the three things you would do from a security perspective out of the gate to ensure that you had the most secure organization possible?
That's a great question. From a formal perspective, if I was going to start an organization, and let's call it a nonprofit, just for the sake of argument, I would try to look at sort of the surface area of what are my risks. So let's do like kind of like a tabletop game of like, what's the risk of what we're doing here? Liberty in North Korea's risk profile as a nonprofit is a lot different than other nonprofits, right? That maybe are not dealing with, trying to get North Korean refugees out through a 3,000-mile underground railroad against a adversarial government, say. And sort of like basing what I would want to do around that. There's like sort of the table stakes stuff too, right? And so I would probably say, okay, let's try to figure out what is our risk profile, and that will decide whether or not we need to bring in sort of lots of technology or outside talent or partner with a firm that is going to help and advise us to do like really crazy pen tests or something like that. So that would be one lens of it. And the other lens would be sort of starting with the foundations up front. which would be day one, let's make sure we have some kind of a routine security training. So at Funraise, we have this, and we've done this for a long time, and we did it from day one, but that really started from Liberty, North Korea, quite honestly. Since we're sort of like a descendant of that organization in some way, we sort of inherited some of its security culture. And so, we have historically done annual security training with all the staff, and we've automated that now because there are lots of great options out there from a free perspective. So we actually use Amazon's security training from an annual perspective for all of employees. And we do a secure coding training for all of our engineers, and that's through a company called Sneak. And these are both like free training. And we just set it up through our learning management system so that people go through it once a year and get a refresher on it. And so that would be one thing I would definitely do starting an organization so that you have that foundation from the get-go. Second thing I would do...
I'm going to come back to your second point because you said
Yeah.
something that I actually would like to get Theresa's
Sure.
feedback on. You said something that most people listening probably don't know what it is. You said pen test. Theresa, could you explain, because this is something that we've done a lot of work with you guys in, could you explain sort of what a pen test is and why that's important?
Sure. So there are many types of pen tests out there, and basically the short answer is you hire a company to do a testing, to put the people and your technology and your systems through a rigorous look to see if there's any wide open pathways or vulnerabilities in any of those things to find a way in. So if you think about like security, I like to use the analogy of a house. You have doors and windows, and you want to make sure that those doors and windows are locked so the bad people can't get in. And if you think of your environment, your organization as that house, if it's whether it's a person or a system or a software, that a bad actor can't break one of those things and get in and get at all of your assets, what you're protecting. And that pen test acts sort of like those bad guys. They're going to try any which way to see if they can break that security, find a way in, and get at your information. And doing a pen test to see if there's anything that you forgot about that you left wide open is really important way to help prevent somebody else that you don't want in there that you didn't allow in there.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Jason, back to you. I think you were coming in hot with point number 2 here, so I'll give you the mic back.
Yeah, so point number 2, I would probably just start with like a short, just kind of, these are non-negotiable policies where for systems that we put in place from a software perspective, let's make sure they all have 2FA or multi-factor authentication. I think there's studies out there to show that if you have multi-factor authentication and the one-time sort of like Google Authenticator style, not like, you got a text message with a code in it, that stuff doesn't work. But if you have the sort of Google Authenticator style one-time password authentication, in addition to passwords turned on your various accounts, it eliminates like 99% of phishing attacks. It's still possible for those attacks to succeed even with multi-factor, but it eliminates a lot of them. And I would just say, make that a policy for all your software. Go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, to tack on with the 2-factor, there's something interesting that I just learned recently with that. So if you do become the target of a phishing attempt, you click on a link and it takes you, let's say you're trying to log into your Google account. They do a really good job, make it all look legit. You put in your email address, you put in your password, and then it triggers your 2-factor authentication. So be mindful, you've prevented someone from immediately getting into your account, so they can't access your information, but they do still have your login information. So once you identify that issue, you do need to immediately go and change at least your password, probably identify or like give your security team, your cybersecurity, your IT, whoever is responsible for that, a heads up of what happened, right? So 2-factor will prevent you from losing access to your account, but it doesn't prevent someone from stealing your account information.
Absolutely. And if you've done something that is typically done, i.e. if you reuse your password, right? So you've given up your password in one spot, maybe it's Google or whatever, fine, you're protected by, the Google Authenticator, but that system now has your username and password that they can use on some other system that you don't have protected with 2FA and that you've unfortunately reused your password with. So that was actually to get to the second part of that is multi-factor authentication and use a password manager. So you don't have to, reuse passwords. So at Funraise, we use 1Password, which is an awesome password manager. So 1Password, it's like the one key to rule them all. It auto-generates passwords and it fills them for you, so you don't have to remember a bunch of different passwords. And so it would be, for me, it's, do like a risk analysis first, depending on what kind of organization I have, to figure out where all those doors are and all those windows are that might be broken and where the most likely window might be broken. Maybe do a pen test to figure out if those doors are not secured. But then also the table stakes stuff, which is, short policy, do the training so that it's in front of everyone's mind, and then do multi-factor and have a password manager policy just for like blanket everything. And then maybe one more thing, like use software. Prefer software that's managed, like managed software versus software that you have to like self-manage and patch yourself, right? Because that's one, like WordPress is a great example. Don't get me wrong, I've used a lot of WordPress in my time, but there's like lots of great managed solutions now, like Webflow and stuff that you don't have to worry about patching the software or patching some plugin or something like that, or patching the version of PHP, and it's just sort of handled for you. So it's like one less thing.
I think the top of mind for the team is so important, right? I think that, and what I mean by that is, and goes back to like the security culture, is when every team member is thinking about keeping the organization secure and safe, it just creates this environment where everyone is on edge, right? And I think that's important when you're dealing with sensitive information. I can't tell you how many times we see in our own Slack channel, hey, Justin, is this email from you? Like, this is kind of a weird request. It doesn't seem like you would be asking this. Like, we see this time and time again, and that's the culture you want. You want your team being skeptical of information that they're receiving, to ensure that they're not the one responsible for opening the door to the bad actors. A lot has changed in technology, and over the last decade, and with the acceleration of AI, we of course have to get an AI question in here. But I would be remiss not to ask Theresa, is how has the landscape changed around cybersecurity, in particular with the acceleration of AI and just the changing landscape of technology altogether?
Yeah, it is a big question, or a big topic, I should say. AI is everywhere. It's not going to be avoidable. Right now, it's not avoidable. And, just going back to the multi-factor authentication too, as criminals have access to these tools and they get smarter, they find those doors are locked, so then they knock harder. It's like always a catch-up game in a way to really try to defend off the criminals, those bad actors. And with MFA, it used to be having an SMS, a code texted to your phone was great. That isn't great anymore. And even with some of those authenticator apps, as the attacks get more sophisticated, as we use AI and it becomes more prevalent, there's a phishing attack and a phishing email. It used to be like, oh, everything's misspelled, it's bad grammar. You can spot it easily. Everything's just become harder to recognize and harder to detect. So, having really secure implemented MFA, that multi-factor authentication, using hardware keys, those YubiKey type things, becomes more important. And you really have to look at, again, going back to something what Justin was talking about, doing that exercise where you look at what are we protecting, how important is it, how could this be attacked, and identifying what those critical places are, and really putting the stronger types of MFA in place for those things. So going back to the door analogy, just putting a stronger lock on those things that are more important. And then with the training too, and with the passwords, definitely using a password manager and having the length of that password, the longer the better. So like at least 15 characters. That's really hard for a human to remember how many different passwords, 300 different passwords, 15 characters each. That's pretty impossible. You need a password manager. And, having that, the lock to that password manager really long and something that you can remember is going to be very important. And then where, keeping those systems up to date, and it kind of goes back to that training piece too, and keeping people informed. Make sure you kind of know what is happening out there. Being subscribed to different just email feeds, just information. Keep yourself informed. Keep your team informed of what's happening out there, what the latest thing is happening. And if you have something that is that you do have to patch, knowing that a patch has come out. Even, like if we talk cell phones, keeping your cell phone patched, or your browser every day, that those are the types of things that you have to check and make sure those are up to date. I think I kind of got off track there.
No, that's good. I was going to ask on one of the points you mentioned on the stronger MFA. Is there an example of what does that look like? What would be? Is that like is it a specific MFA solution, or something that I'm not thinking about?
Yeah, so there is passkeys. That's kind of the latest and greatest thing out there. The use of passkeys, where it's not really a password that is being sent, and the use of biometrics, because that I don't want to go too deep on things, trying to keep it a little bit high level, but if you have a password and then if you have another code, I mean, that code comes on your phone through an authenticator app, and it is accepted as, something you have and something the password, and then you have your phone with that code. But really that code is also something, and that could be shared, where if like biometrics, it's something you are. So you can't, it's two types of different authentications is really the important part there. So there are other solutions out there that, like a physical key that you have to have. So something in your possession like that. It just takes that authenticator app one step further. And going back to that idea of what it is that you're protecting. So, how important is it? Is it going to completely be devastating if this information is accessed? Maybe, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not that North Korean list of people. Something like that, you're going to want those stronger locks and that stronger protection on. So, know what you have, and what criticality it is. Where is it? Who has access to it? What data is that system saving? All of that information, that inventorying of what you have in what you need to protect, and what the criticality of it is really important. So it should make sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of want to add a couple things to that. You mentioned UB keys before, and those things are awesome. They're the little USB keys that you plug in, and that's the thing that you have. And so you plug it in, and when you do a two-factor flow, it's reading from the thing that you plugged into your USB. I don't have an affiliate link for YubiKey. Not anything related to them at all, but they're really great stuff. And then going back to the stronger locks thing, I just wanted to comment on, it's like also really easy to go overboard, right? And that leads to its own problems where you might say, well, let's just do maximum security on everything. And if you do maximum security on everything, then it's frustrating for your users or your employees. And then they'll default to trying to end run around all of your different policies. And so it's doing that assessment and trying to like introspect and say, what is the proportional level of security that I need for the thing that I want to protect, and putting those in place so that your security policies and your procedures are all followed uniformly for all the different levels of the things that you want to protect, versus people getting annoyed that you force them to change their password every like 9 hours or some nonsense like this, right? And so I just wanted to add that to what Theresa said.
Absolutely. Proportional is perfect word there.
Awesome. And then the comment I was going to make, just going back to sort of how sophisticated and how things have changed, specifically around phishing, is, yes, it used to come from like the Prince of Saudi Arabia, and like I never talked to this person in my life. Now it's coming from a colleague, right? And it looks like, in the case when we did our penetration test at Liberty North Korea, it was the right domain with one letter misspelled. That was it. And most people aren't looking at the domain. And so I think when you think through, and this happens a lot at Funraise, for whatever reason, I'm the person that's always asking for random requests from our company. There was one recently going around, like a DocuSign link going around to employees coming from Justin Wheeler, and it had to make an announcement saying, "Hey, listen, I will never send you an agreement to sign without first telling you that it's coming from me." And this goes back to security culture, goes about to creating policies around the team to loop them in on how to act and how to behave around things that may seem uncertain. We are definitely at time here, and so it was a great conversation. I think there's a lot of really great resources mentioned throughout the call that we're also going to gather for those listening. We'll put them in the show notes, so you can take a look at some of the resources that were mentioned from our panel today. But David, Jason, and Theresa, thank you so much for chiming in on cybersecurity, on this topic that's highly important for all organizations, for nonprofits. And so I appreciate your guys' time and perspectives shared today.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this, guys.
Absolutely.